Rumors have been swirling that the Arizona Cardinals are planning to trade for a cornerback to solidify a position that's in need of help. Now, much of this rumor can be largely attributed to Arizona sports insider John Gambadoro, who's been talking about it on his radio show and recently tweeted a response to a Cardinals fan confirming that the Cardinals do plan to trade for a cornerback. Now, whether you're a fan of John Gambadoro's or not, he generally does have connections with teams and often is right about these things, though he's been wrong at times as well. So with these trade rumors in mind, I thought I'd talk about a couple potential trade targets for the Cardinals at cornerback. Now, the first thing we need to understand is that cornerback is a premium position and teams are not in the habit of trading them away, especially not good ones. Teams that seem to be legitimate playoff contenders aren't going to trade away their starting cornerbacks. So when we're looking at potential trade targets for the Cardinals, we need to look for teams in certain situations, like teams that have an abundance of depth, so much depth that they anticipate that they're probably going to have to cut someone who has trade value. Those teams might be willing to trade someone who won't be a starter for them, but could potentially be a starter on another team. Another situation where a team might be willing to part with a good cornerback is a team that's in rebuild mode and has an aging veteran on their team who's near the end of his contract, and they're looking to trade him away to get some draft capital to continue their rebuild. Another situation where a team might be willing to trade away a cornerback is a team that has a player who's near the end of their rookie deal, but does not figure into the team's future plans. It could be a player who was selected in one of the earlier rounds of the NFL draft, but never managed to grab hold of a starting job, and the team doesn't plan to extend them or re-sign them when their rookie deal ends. So these are the kinds of situations where you might be able to find yourself a cornerback in trade, but you're not going to pry away a star from a team unless you're willing to give up the farm for them. And even then, it probably needs to be a situation where the player has expressed that they want out. Teams want to keep a lockdown star cornerback. So with that all in mind, let's look at some players who might be trade targets because they fit one of these situations. Before we get into the potential trade candidates, please do me a quick favor and click like on this video and subscribe to my channel. If you're a Cardinals fan, I think you'll enjoy my content. First up, we have a trio of cornerbacks with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Ravens have historically been one of those teams that has a lot of depth at cornerback. Right now, they have Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Fuller, Marcus Peters, and a pair of fourth-round draft picks in Jalen Armour-Davis and Demarion Williams. That's a total of 5 cornerbacks that the team probably has no interest in cutting. And most teams keep 4 to 5 cornerbacks, so there's room to move one of those players. Now, if we're talking about one of the veterans, I think Marcus Peters is the most likely candidate. Marlon Humphrey is their clear number 1 and the best cornerback on that roster. They're not going to trade him. They just signed Kyle Fuller this offseason, so it's unlikely they would move him. So with Marcus Peters coming back from an injury and on the last year of his deal, he seems like the most likely veteran that they would consider moving. But it's not out of the question that they would trade one of those 2 fourth-round picks. In fact, the Ravens actually traded away a rookie cornerback that they drafted in the 5th round last year because they had so much depth at the position. So if they did that last year, it's not out of the question they'd look to do it again this year. So any one of those 3 players could be an option for the Cardinals. Next up is Bradley Roby from the New Orleans Saints. Roby is 30 years old and his contract is going to void after the 2022 season. The Saints have Marshawn Lattimore as their number 1 cornerback and 3 younger cornerbacks that they might want to try to develop into their starters. These cornerbacks include Paulson Adebo, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and Alontae Taylor. If the Saints decided that they wanted to go with a youth movement at cornerback, they might be willing to move on from Roby. The next cornerback on this list is Noah Igbinoghene. Igbinoghene is a former first-round pick selected 30th overall in the 2020 draft, who hasn't lived up to his draft status for the Dolphins. He only played 78 defensive snaps in 2020, and with Xavier Howard and Byron Jones likely to start, with new addition Mackenzie Alexander slated to play in the slot, Igbinoghene seems to be the odd man out. And considering that the coaching staff that's in place now is not the staff that drafted him, they might be interested in trading him away to pick up some draft capital. But Igbinoghene has struggled thus far in his career, so I'm not so sure he'd actually be an improvement over Josh Jackson, who's looked pretty good this preseason. Now, the last name I want to mention is the one that I think is the most interesting, and I think might be the most likely candidate, and that's cornerback Greedy Williams from the Cleveland Browns. Williams was a second-round pick out of LSU in 2019, and he's currently on the last year of his rookie deal. Despite being drafted in the second round, he has not managed to secure a starting job for the Browns. The Browns have 4 other young cornerbacks who look like they're the future of the position for the team. Denzel Ward, who's their clear number 1 cornerback, Greg Newsome II, who looked really good as a rookie and has a promising future, a former undrafted free agent named AJ Green, not that AJ Green, who looked really good last year. He had a PFF grade of 90.3 in 176 snaps. And they also drafted cornerback Martin Emerson in the 3rd round of this year's draft. With those 4 cornerbacks and Greedy Williams being on the last year of his rookie deal, it seems like the Browns don't have him as part of their future plans. And the idea of them trading away seems to make sense. Now, there is one other detail about this that I find kind of interesting. The rumors about the Cardinals trading for a cornerback seem to point to them making the trade next week. So the Cardinals seem to be waiting to pull the trigger until sometime next week. Why would they do that? Well, I wonder if this all has something to do with the timing of the Deshaun Watson situation. The NFL was appealing the decision about his suspension, trying to get a full year suspension, and recently news broke that it ended up being an 11-game suspension. I have to wonder if the Browns were sort of waiting on pulling the trigger on a trade because they wanted to see how the Watson situation would play out. Maybe knowing how much of the season they were going to have to play with a backup and whether or not this was going to be a lost season figured into their willingness to trade a cornerback. I don't know if that's the case. Again, this is me just trying to connect the dots. But any way you shape it up, Williams seems like a really good potential trade candidate. Former second-round pick, could be a nice addition to the Cardinals' cornerback depth, and someone who doesn't seem to be in his current team's future plans. So who do you think the Cardinals should trade for at cornerback? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Cardinal Rule.